So we were talking about the war. Did we talk about the War Powers Act? All right, let's mention that and get back to make sure that we do this. The president has a lot of authority, but one area that's been unclear over the years is the president's ability as commander in chief. Okay, and here's why. We know that Congress has the authority to declare war, and the president runs the military when we declare war. But what happens if there's an emergency, like after 9/11? Does the president wait around for Congress to authorize some type of military action? No. Right? Within 6 days, the president had military boots on the ground over in Afghanistan. Right? They were hunting down Al Qaeda. The War Powers Resolution gives the president the authority to do this. Okay? And here's what this law does it lets the president respond to emergency situations without letting him have the military for just forever. Okay? So the president can commit the military anywhere in the world for up to 60 days without Congress declaring war. Okay? The president can. What is it? That's it. This is a law that allows the president to commit the military to anywhere in the world for up to 60 days. This way, the president can respond to an emergency without waiting on Congress. Okay? And he just has to inform Congress within 72 hours, or excuse me, 48 hours. So he just has to tell Congress what he's doing. Here's an example. I think it was 2011, President Obama says we've received intelligence that Osama bin Laden's hiding out in Pakistan. And he authorized a Navy SEAL team to go in and capture or kill Osama bin Laden. And of course, that raid didn't take long at all. And after it was over, he was more than happy to tell everybody about it. Lets the president act without a declaration of war. But it keeps him limited because he's limited to 60 days. Now, the law says after 60 days, Congress can give the president an additional 30 days. They can tell him to bring the troops home, or they can just declare war and say, president can do whatever he needs to do. Okay? This War Powers Resolution, though, it puts limits on the president. This way, he can't just commit the military indefinitely. Now, people also expect, whether we like it or not, the president to be a global leader. Because the United States has so much wealth and so much military strength, when the United States president acts in a particular way, it signals to the rest of the world what's considered acceptable behavior. They follow the trend. The president, whether we want him to be or not, is a trendsetter. If the president does it, most countries will find it acceptable. Except when you wear a tan suit. What is it? I know, you're like, it's a controversy. And look, anybody who was around that time, they know. They know what the tan suit controversy is. Look, it's just the way it's perceived. Okay. One other thing that's important, and the Presidential Succession Act. Okay. Early on, when we didn't think about presidents getting assassinated, because America's fairly isolated. It's not till Abraham Lincoln that a president actually gets killed. So he's isolated a little bit in that regard. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, Andrew Johnson became president, but Andrew Johnson didn't have a vice president. Okay, you just didn't fill the job back then, and people got a little bit worried because they said Andrew Johnson's not a very popular guy. What happens if he gets killed? You're like, oh gosh, nobody knows what to do. And so they said, look, we need a line of succession. So that in case something happens to both the president and vice president, somebody will step up. And so they created a line. And now that line is 19 people deep. All right. So if the president and vice president both died at the same time or within just a little bit of a time frame, the Speaker of the House is next on the list. So you got president, vice president, Speaker of the House. God, and over there, poor old Rydell's like, no, not that. President Pelosi. It could happen. But what if all three of those people all like died within a short time frame of each other. Okay. The next person on the list is the president pro tem of the Senate. Pro tempore, or the temporary president of the Senate. Okay. The president pro tempore. All right. What happened if all four of those people died at one time? Well, then they go through the list of cabinet officers, like Secretary of State is next, then Secretary of Treasury, then the Attorney General, and you go in the order in which those cabinet offices were created. Yes, Mallory. Great question. Here's the thing. People don't realize this. Most of the cabinet officers and those individuals, they're never together very often. And the only time they're ever all together in the same building is during the president's State of the Union address. And they purposely keep somebody in the line of succession out and in a secure location so that somebody, in an event like a disaster like that would happen, that somebody would be left. Right? And if all 19 of them are dead, then we got bigger problems. Question, Tama? Great question. Why would they put the Speaker of the House ahead of the President pro tempore of the Senate? Why the House? Why would they get the nod? They ultimately represent the will of the people. And it's like, look, we're going to trust the people on this, the people's branch there. And that's a good question to ask, right? Although that would be like the worst nightmare for Republicans if they had Nancy Pelosi as president. They're like, no, God, no. Right? Or Kamala Harris might be as bad. Right? If you're a conservative, you wouldn't like either one. Okay? Now, let's move forward here and talk about the vice president. All right? All these names, these are names of people in American history that have all been vice president. Do you really recognize any of these? Yeah, there's a reason. What does that tell you about the vice presidency? Not that important. This guy right up here, John Nance Garner, this guy was Franklin Roosevelt's first vice president. Roosevelt got elected to 4 terms. He had 3 different VPs. All right. And John Nance Garner, they asked him in particular, they said, well, how do you feel about being vice president? And he described it to reporters. He said, vice presidency isn't worth a warm bucket of piss. Right. And people were shocked that he would say that. By the way, newspaper reporters had to change the word. They were like, let's use the word spit because we can't print the word piss. Oof. Okay. So vice presidents, they tend not to be recognized. Look, some vice presidents went on to become president, like Lyndon Johnson or Harry Truman, but that's the only reason that you knew them, because they became presidents later on. All these people on this list, and you don't know anything about any of them. Although I like Hannibal Hamlin's name. That was Lincoln's first vice president, in case you're wondering. All those other people, they're just nobodies in the grand scheme of things. Mm-hmm. George Clinton, give me a second. I want to say that might have been Madison's VP. George Washington had John Adams as his vice president. All right. Now let's talk about the vice president here. Okay. The vice president, according to the Constitution, has one job. You get to cast tie-breaking votes in the Senate. If there's a tie vote in the Senate, you get to break it. That's your only official job according to the Constitution. Fun fact, vice president still gets a nice salary. You get $250K a year. I think you get a nice pension. You get a nice brownstone house in Washington, D.C. in the residential neighborhood. Secret Service protection while you're the vice president. It's a good gig. Air Force 2. It's not Air Force 1, but it's still pretty nice. Great question. And the answer is, Wiley, sort of. Yeah. Yeah. You was like, hey, you need a VP? All right. Now, the qualifications to be vice president are simple. You got to have the same qualifications as president, because if you had to step up into that role, you obviously have to have the qualifications that the president would have to have. Yay. Look, sometimes, though, vice presidents, Wiley, you talk about vice presidents, sometimes they don't do anything that useful. And Joe Biden as vice president, sometimes he'd have some awkward moments, and I'll show you that in a minute. Question. Actually, yes, the last president who didn't or go to college was Harry Truman. 1951 was when he left office, or 1952, excuse me. Yeah, but not that long ago. Look at that. Joe Biden known for getting a little extra close to people. All right. By the way, is anybody here? Some people are huggers, and some people. Is anybody not a hugger? You're like, I don't like people touching me, right? Keep your distance. All right. Joe Biden, he's the complete opposite. Joe Biden doesn't know a person he wouldn't get close to. Come on, that's a good one right there. Like, I keep wondering, what's the backstory on this picture? It's not photoshopped either. That's a good one too. By the way, in this one right here, they were introducing a Secretary of Defense under Obama, and he's like rubbing her shoulders for like a good 30 seconds. Oof. He could be. I don't know. It looks. I don't know. But look, vice presidents get a bad rep. Okay. Now, Wiley, you asked a good question. Does the vice president just sit around and do nothing? And it depends. Vice presidents are as involved in the administration as the president wants them to be. Okay? Some presidents involve the vice president in a lot of decision making. Okay? So, for example, George W. Bush, when he was president, Dick Cheney was his vice president. And Dick Cheney told him when he got asked to run as his running mate, he said, look, if you pick me and we win this, there's some policy areas that I want to be in charge of. Okay? And George Bush said, fine. And most of it was like foreign policy, military stuff. And so George Bush, when he became president, he told people in the White House, told people in Congress, hey, if you got a problem and it's military based, you take it to the vice president. And if he's not sure about something or he wants to contact me about it, then he can come and talk to me. But don't come to me with something that's military based because I'm just going to go tell you to see the vice president, right? And he empowered the vice president to do that. He didn't have to. You can involve your vice president as much as you want. George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and even Donald Trump to an extent let their vice presidents handle certain policy areas. So you knew that, if you're part of that administration, talk to the vice president. Others, like Franklin Roosevelt, didn't trust their vice presidents and basically just said, yeah, it's like you're just there, like in a glass case that says, do not break unless there's an emergency.
What about back when the person who lost the presidential election had to become the vice president?
Early on in the first couple presidential races, whoever finished second in the presidential voting became vice president, and it was the same way. Like George Washington, I mean, he was his own man, but he tried to involve John Adams as much as possible. And a lot of people early on would try to involve them because, they just thought it was good form. But oh yeah, it would be absolutely terrible. But at the same time, if Joe Biden had to incorporate Donald Trump into his administration as vice president, he would simply just be like, put him in an office and take away his Twitter, which has already been done. All right. So, vice president, you're involved as much as the president wants you to be. All right. And as quickly as they give you authority, like if I'm the president and I make Jesse my vice president, and Jesse does something that annoys me or angers me, or he makes a really dumb decision, what do I stop doing? Trusting him and allowing him to make decisions. Yes. No, you cannot fire the vice president. And that's a good question. You can phase them out and not let them make any decisions. And what's really fun is when you hold like cabinet meetings and stuff and you don't invite the vice president. The vice president can be impeached, yes. And one of them, incidentally, in that list of vice presidents, one of them was going to get impeached, but he quit. Spiro Agnew was the only vice president to ever resign. He was Richard Nixon's first vice president. Oof. Question, Cooper? Yes, you can resign. Nixon actually resigned before his time was up, but you can quit anytime you want. Okay? Now, the vice president, like I said, they're as involved as you want them to be. But presidents, remember, they don't just rely on themselves and the vice president, they also have the cabinet offices. Okay? The 15 executive departments. And I'll show you a list of them here in a second. Okay? The 15 departments, they help carry out the laws. What is it? Same as president. Yes, we did. It's like as much as you want them to be involved. All right. Now, cabinet offices. There's 15 executive departments, and take a look at the departments. And no, you don't have to memorize them. All right. But you got 15 cabinet departments here. Okay. And they're all responsible for carrying out certain policies. Like, for example, laws about student loans, Pell Grants, getting money to primary schools, secondary schools. Take a guess which cabinet department handles that? Education. Shocking, I know. Okay. Which one do you think is responsible for enforcing criminal laws? Justice. You guys are geniuses. Okay. So those 15 departments, remember, most of those people working at those departments have been there working there their entire adult lives or for a significant amount of time. Okay. The head of each department, though, is the person that the president gets to appoint. Those are the cabinet officers. Okay. So every department's headed by a single individual that the president gets to appoint, a cabinet officer. And if you're the head of the agricultural department, you're the secretary of agriculture. Right? They're all the secretary of whatever except justice. And remember, who's in charge of that one? Attorney General. Okay. I think Secretary of Justice would still be a better title. Oh, the Solicitor General. We'll talk about them later too. Interior deals with inside the homeland, like they deal with national parks, issues involving Native Americans. They cover a lot of stuff that you wouldn't even think. All right. Now, if you're one of those, and by the way, Joe Biden got another one of his cabinet officers appointed or officially confirmed by the Senate. Okay. Yesterday, Merrick Garland got to be Attorney General with a 70-30 confirmation vote. And if you're one of those 15 cabinet officers, one of those heads of those departments, there's certain things that you're going to do. You have two main tasks. One, advise the president, and two, you help carry out those policies or carry out the law. So if I'm president and I make Losh over there, my Secretary of Education, I tell her, hey, part of your job is to carry out the policies, meaning you make sure the education money gets to where it's going. You make sure that schools comply with the various rules and policies that we have for them. So, for example, one of the things is, what would happen if Cabell Midland said, we are now closing off science and math classes to girls because they're not interested in those classes. You can't take them if you're a girl. Would we be in violation of the law? Absolutely we would. Okay? And the education department would be, once they hear about it, they're going to start making some calls and they are going to know what's going on. And it'll be Losh's job to make sure that the school either gets in compliance or they're in big trouble. And by the way, if you're not in compliance with that, with the law, you can lose all your federal monies, which, remember, you can't survive without the federal money. Oof. Okay? So you have two jobs, advise the president and help carry out the policies. Which one of those jobs do you think is more important for the cabinet secretary to do? You would think so, but no. Carry out the laws. Okay? Now, those cabinet secretaries, here's how that would work in an instance. Losh is my Secretary of Education, and so she comes to me and she goes, President Scalise, which has a nice ring to it, by the way. She goes, President Scalise, right now the pandemic has caused a lot of problems for people. A lot of people don't have jobs, they don't have extra money, and I think we should put a hold on collecting student loan payments for 6 more months. All right? And she says, look, I know this is an important decision, and I felt like I had to run this one by you beforehand. I'm like, Losh, I'm glad you said that because we're going to start collecting student loan money again. And Losh is like, Mr. President, I don't think that's a good idea. And I said, Losh, I know you don't think it's a good idea, but I need you to go and do it anyway. All right. So what do I expect Losh as my Secretary of Education to go and do? Go and carry out that policy, even though she might not agree with it. Okay. Your job is to be like, yes, Mr. President, and you go make it happen. All right? Because what happens if she does something against my wishes? You could fire her. All right? And like, I would hate to have to do that. By the way, why would it look bad on me to fire one of my cabinet officials? because I appointed them, and it looks like I'm an idiot and I don't know who I'm appointing. All right. These people, first of all, to get their jobs, and we just mentioned this, but just so you know, cabinet secretaries have to be appointed by the president and they're confirmed by the Senate. You can fire them at any time. But once again, that looks really bad. Makes you look incompetent. Why would it be bad, though, to keep Losh on? As bad as it would be to fire her, why would it be bad to let her stay in her position if she defies me? Yes, and what will she do the next opportunity she gets? Defy me again. And I can't have that happening repeatedly. Right? Losh is like, I will do whatever I want. Okay? So even though you're there to help give advice to the president, your job is to do what the president wants you to do. Now, in private, Losh can disagree with me. That's okay. But in public, you're going to defend my policies and you're going to act like you're 100% on board with it. Because the last thing I need you doing is going out and be like, well, I told the president it's a bad idea to collect student loan payments right now, but he did it anyway. No, your job is to be completely on board with it. And you're like, the president and I have conferred, and we are moving forward with collecting student loan payments. The economy's bouncing back. People have money. It's time to restart something normal again. Oof. One of the things we mentioned, Joe Biden, when he appointed Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen, he told her that we're going to make a change and we're going to include a different face on the $20 bill. And who did he say he wanted on there? Harriet Tubman. Right? So he leaves the details up to the Secretary of Treasury, like what it's going to look like, when it's going to be rolled out, the details, all the hard work that goes into it, what kind of engravers are we using, what's the bill going to look like, all that stuff I'm going to leave to you because I don't have time to come around and do it myself. Think of it this way. Mr. McGuffin is technically the principal here, and he's in charge of all the teachers and employees, but does he have the time or even the patience to come around and tell every teacher how to teach? How exhausting would that be for him? Right? And then on top of that, he's got to trust his teachers to some extent. He's like, look, that's why we hired you. That's your job. Go make it happen. Wow. All right. Cabinet secretaries are there to help carry out those policies and make it work. And when something goes wrong, even if you don't do it on purpose, who do you think is going to have to take the blame for it? The cabinet secretaries. Here's an example. 2009, 2010, the Affordable Care Act gets passed, and one of the things the law did was it said that the government, and specifically the Secretary of Health and Human Services, would set up a website for people to go online and shop for the best insurance plans. So the government would make a website, and you'd be able to look at different insurance companies and what types of insurance they would offer so you could compare prices, right? The Secretary of Health and Human Services, a lady named Kathleen Sebelius, got her department working on it. And after months and months and months, they started the website. And do you guys remember what happened to this website? You might be too young to remember. I'll tell you this, it didn't go well. The website crashed in its first 2 days, which is no good. People, when they were able to get online, had to wait hours in filling out these forms. And have you ever clicked on a web browser, something on a web browser, and it takes forever? And you hate that. And look, also too, old people, they're not patient with that. My dad's one of the ones that he doesn't click just one time. How many times does he click? Like if he doesn't, it's like 9, 10 times. I'm like, Dad, every time you click it, it just restarts it. You can't. He's like, it's not working. It should work. And I'm like, oh gosh. All right. Who do you think took the blame for this? The Secretary of Health and Human Services. President Obama looked at her and said, look, somebody's got to pay for this mistake. This is a big mistake. Okay? Same thing that if the Treasury Secretary now came out and designed a bill that didn't have Harry Tubman on it and released it to the public, the president would be like, you messed up bad, right? And typically what they do, you don't fire them per se, they resign rather mysteriously. You offer them the chance to submit their resignation. Oof. Right? People were critical of President Trump because one of the things he would do is some of these people would come to work and President Trump would tweet that they were fired. Yeah. So it's like they're finding out the same time the rest of the world found out. They say that south of the border, they call that no bueno. No bueno. All right. Now, cabinet officers are there to help carry out those policies, and they do give advice. But something else here too, and I wanted to mention this: when I appoint somebody to say be the Secretary of State, which the State Department's in charge of international relationships, what type of person do I pick for this job? Somebody who's qualified, who probably has international experience, right? Obviously so. But what else do I want them to be like? What do I want them to think like? You want them to think like you do. They should probably have political views that are at least somewhat within range of yours. Okay? So when I hire Anna Kaiser to be my Secretary of Treasury, I know that we have similar mindsets and I can trust her to do that job and that she's not going to try to one up me or steal the spotlight or she's not going to try to make a policy that I wouldn't agree with. That's why I hire people who think like me. But they got to have some experience in the field, otherwise, the Senate's not going to confirm them. Plus, one of the biggest critiques in President Trump, he had Betsy DeVos be his Secretary of Education, and she had zero experience in schools. She didn't even go to public schools. So people were highly critical of that. Okay? Those cabinet offices will pick up with that tomorrow, y'all.